Worshipful masters, distinguished brethren, and brethren all, I can recall in my childhood days my grandmother spending some time telling me about what it was like in the war years. And one of the things that struck me most was the idea of a world without signposts. How difficult that must be. Today, of course, everybody relies on sat-nav and their phone and other devices to find their way around. But I just tried to imagine a world without any road signs at all, nothing to point us the way, and thought how very difficult that must have been. And indeed, I'm rather fond of road signs. There are some fascinating road signs around, and if you look at the pictures around the screen, I've included one or two. I never actually saw the sign, but I do recall meeting a vicar once who said to me, "I'm the rector of Steeple Bumpstead." Wow, what a fantastic name. I also found out that he was the master of hounds there too, and imagine that must have been quite a place. When I was at university, I had a nice little job driving for Whitbreads, the brewers, and mostly I used to drive around their off licenses, and this was in Kent. So you'll notice the sign on the screen which says ham sandwich, and I passed that one more than a few times. Now, if, like me, you're a Wurzels fan, and I'm very disappointed that we're not able to have the party in the park, you will know the name Nemnet Thrubwell. I've listened to the Wurzels for years, and I've often thought that somewhere like Nemnet Thrubwell really must be a made-up place. But it isn't. And now, as I drive from my home in Wales to the port at Portbury, I often pass the Nemnet Thrubwell sign. So signs are pretty important in our lives, but so are symbols, and perhaps we might reflect for a moment on what's the difference between a sign and a symbol. Symbols are a bit deeper, and just going to read you a little bit from a theologian and philosopher called Paul Tillich, who decided that symbols might affect human beings in a different way. And his first main point is that symbols are not merely signs. They point to something beyond themselves, both signs and symbols, but actually only the symbol participates in the reality that they point to. So, for example, a sign may point us to a road, whereas a symbolic flag, and again, there's one on the screen, a symbolic flag says something about the power of the king or queen of the nation. So Tillich goes on to say that there are four main points in symbols. They point to something beyond themselves. They participate in that reality in some way. And they open up for us levels of reality which we might not otherwise have considered. And they open up dimensions of ourselves and our soul, which might respond to that reality. There is just one sign that I've put up here that I think is also a symbol. And if you're of a certain age, the sign in the middle at the bottom of the screen is the old-fashioned road sign for school. And for years as a child, I used to wonder what that was all about. And then I discovered that actually the flaming torch represents the light of learning and enlightenment, which is sought through education. Well, we know all about that, of course, because as Masons, we continue to seek enlightenment in our Masonic lives. And around the screen, I have put some of the working tools of Freemasonry, because they are very much symbols, and they point us to a reality that is beyond ourselves. So, for example, in the first degree, I've always been very struck by the idea of the gavel as representing the force of conscience. And the thought of banging down hard with a gavel on vain and unbecoming thoughts is an image that I find very powerful indeed, and really very helpful as to the function of conscience. And so that is one of my favourite moments in the first degree. And also the chisel. The chisel points out the advantages of education. I quite often in Wellington School Lodge get to present the first degree working tools to ex-pupils of mine. And it's rather a fun moment to be able to say to them, and the chisel points out the benefits of education, and actually I've been telling you that for years. Then, of course, there are the other symbolic working tools that we find around the screen. The square and the level, again, are very powerful images that help us to participate in a reality that is very much part of our lives. And indeed, those things, some of the expressions associated with them, have passed into common parlance. So we talk of being squared away, or on the square. We talk of leveling with someone, meaning that we are being straight with them, and so on. And isn't it interesting that some of those symbols and their significance have actually passed into common parlance and common understanding? When we come to the third degree, the pencil too is always a very powerful image for me. As I'm something of an artist, the pencil speaks to me of creativity. And so it participates in a deeper reality than just being an ordinary tool. And then, of course, there are the other things that we focus on in our Masonic rituals, the square and the compasses. And of course, there's always that moment when our attention is drawn to the letter G, when we all stand and for a moment raise our eyes to that, thinking of the greater reality of the Supreme Being. So all these things lead us into a depth of thought, and perhaps now you begin to see that actually a symbol is deeper than a sign, and we are very blessed with symbols to help us understand the fullness of life in our Masonic journey. And if you've not thought about them for a while and just accepted them as a given, when we do finally get back to Lodge again, and you're sitting there listening to the working tools being presented to a candidate, then do also pause for a minute and think hard about the reality to which they point. There are also extended versions of the working tools, which again help to bring out the significance of symbol. And so I hope that as you think about these symbols once again, particularly as we return to Lodge, you may find your life further enriched and fulfilled. Now, I've done a number of these orations over the last few months, and I'm going to take a break for the next couple of months over the summer. And I very much hope that in the autumn, we should be able to return to the fullness of our Masonic life. And I hope to be able to meet you once again in the Lodge. Take care, everyone, and thank you as always for listening.